This morning's sermon title is the result of a happy accident. Last Monday, I did the worship bulletin, something I do almost every Monday morning there at Bloomfield. And I selected the gospel lectionary text, the one that thousands of Christians will be considering today. I selected that text for the sermon, and I titled the sermon, Choosing the Cross. Which seemed to make sense. Jesus was talking about how he had chosen the cross, and how we must choose the cross if we follow him. Then on Tuesday, I'm usually off on Tuesday, I listened on YouTube to Bishop Robert Barron, who's a Catholic priest and a teacher. I listened to his talk entitled Evangelizing Through Beauty. You can Google it on YouTube and listen to it. Evangelizing Through Beauty. A talk where he says Christians can best share their faith by focusing on beauty, which can lead someone to accepting the church's view of what is good and what is true. He said if we start with truth, with a capital T, many in our society can't hear that because they're relativists. They believe in the truth is relative, not absolute. And he said if you start with what is good, what is right, what is wrong, in other words, too many people think that's relative too, and you won't have an audience. But if you start with beauty, beauty in nature, beauty in architecture, beauty in art, in literature, in music, that's something we can all relate to, and that can lead someone from beauty to eventually to good, to eventually to truth. I found Bishop Barron's talk very moving. And on Wednesday, when I proofread the bulletin, which I do almost every Wednesday, I changed my sermon title to The Beauty of the Cross, writing in the beauty of and marking out choosing. Only Donna in the parish office did not notice that I had drawn a line through choosing. So on Thursday, when I picked up the bulletins, I noticed that Donna and I had accidentally collaborated on the title you now see before you, The Beauty of Choosing the Cross. So thank you, Donna, for helping me out. You all believe in happy accidents? Do you? Are these happy accidents sometimes providential? I think so. I think the happy accident of our sermon title may help us as we consider the gospel text for today. Again, thousands, maybe millions of Christians will be hearing this very text today. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said. This shall never happen to you. Jesus turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Then Jesus said to his disciples, Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done. Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Join me as we pray. The beauty of choosing the cross. The beauty compels us. The cross challenges us. Lord, be with us today as we ponder that which in some ways is not ponderable. But we do this every Sunday. You have a preacher who sees through a glass darkly, Paul wrote. And you have a people much like the people that have always lived, who struggle between light and darkness. So Lord, be with us today. Speak to us and with us. I pray, Lord, that the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts might be acceptable unto you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, friends, using the bulletin and looking, let's just briefly take a little journey through the text. And it begins, verse 21, with a transitional statement. From that time on, now you read this in Matthew more than once, and it's Matthew's way of signaling that a change in focus is in place, either because Jesus made that explicit, or because Matthew, in his freedom to write the gospel as God allowed him to, he adds the transitions for his focus of the gospel. Either way, it is a signal to us that something new is afoot. So from this time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples. Now, disciples can refer to just the 12, and we know those 12 as the apostles, Peter and James and John and Andrew and the others. But keep in mind that Jesus had dozens, hundreds of disciples, and what it means here in this context, we don't know. Matthew doesn't tell us. Was Jesus speaking only to the 12, or was he speaking to maybe hundreds of his followers, men and women and children? But he's telling whatever his audience is at this time. He says, the Son of Man, which was his name for himself. It comes out of Ezekiel. The Son of Man must go to Jerusalem, because a prophet must always die in Jerusalem, the Scripture tells us. And Jesus was a prophet. That he must go to Jerusalem, and he's going to suffer many things at the hands of the religious leaders. Now, he was crucified by Pontius Pilate, but it wasn't really his doing. It was the Jewish religious leaders that saw to it. That Jesus would first suffer, and then he would die. He would be killed. And on the third day be raised to life. Resurrection. At the heart of our faith. Without the resurrection, there is no Christian faith. Zero. We're to be pitied above all people if there's no resurrection. Now, verse 22 is really interesting. Remember last week, Jesus said, "Who do people say that I am?" You remember that? And Peter, moved by the Spirit, says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus said to the effect, "Amen, Peter. It wasn't just you saying that. God the Father revealed that to you." Remember that? Peter went to the head of the class. And perhaps here, he's feeling a little full of himself, you suppose. Have you ever done something really stupid? Have you? I do it on the golf course from time to time, and I'll even talk to myself after I hit a horrible shot, and I say, "That was stupid." Have you ever had that experience? Not on the golf course, maybe, but when you've done something really stupid? Well, verse 22 is an example of, I don't know how you rate stupidity, but this is at the top of the list. Peter takes Jesus aside to do what? Come on. To rebuke him. Now, I don't know your definition of stupid, but this is way up there on my definition. Take Jesus aside to rebuke Jesus. Peter's heart was in the right place. He said, "Never, Lord. You're not going to be beaten. You're not going to be killed. This shall never happen to you." You see, Peter and the others, they were looking for a powerful powerful political Messiah, a new King David, who would kick the Romans out, not go there to be crucified. That was never in their thinking. Jesus, verse 23, turns to Peter. Oh man. He just praised Peter for his statement about Jesus being the Messiah. And now he says to Peter, get behind me, what? Satan. It's reminiscent of Matthew chapter 4, Jesus in the desert. The devil or Satan tempting Jesus. Just bow down to me and I'll give you all these kingdoms in an instant. Jesus sees behind Peter's words, he sees Satan. It is the tempter. All over again. Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You don't have the concerns of God in mind, Peter, but merely human concerns. And then in verse 24, Jesus turns to his disciples, and I'm picturing there's more than 12, but whatever. But the words certainly pertain not only to them then, but to us today. Jesus said to his disciples, and he says to us, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves. Say no to yourself. We are sinners by nature. And take up your cross, which in this context becomes a metaphor for service, for sacrifice, for suffering. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life will find it. That's a paradox. It's repeated multiple times by most, maybe all of the gospel writers. I don't remember if John uses this paradox, but Matthew, Mark, and Luke certainly do. A paradox makes no sense on the surface. Think about it. If you want to find your life, you have to lose it. What? How can you find your life by losing it? It makes no sense. And yet, it's a paradox. And the Bible lives in paradox. Almost all the biblical truths are described or explained by paradox, seeming contradictions. I've read that in the Eastern world, that's a capital E, they live in paradox without any problem. We in the Western world, we want to solve the paradox. We think it's an equation that has to be solved to X. Dick, you never did very well at that in algebra, did you? I don't think you ever got that X thing, did you? No. Dick asked his math teacher once, Arnold Byers, and Mr. Byer, how did that thing get from the left side to the right side? And Mr. Byer, frustrated with Dick, said, it's magic, Dick. But the Eastern world lives in paradox, and we need to learn to live in paradox. If you want to find your life, you have to lose it. Then verse 26, notice this. It says, what good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? I do not understand, and I will never understand how the liberal scholars and pastors, including some United Methodist pastors, who have built their whole theology on 3 words. God is love. And then, here you go, Liz, they extrapolate from those 3 words a whole theology based on a simple little syllogism. God is love. Sending someone to hell is not loving, therefore God would send nobody to hell. There's a logic to it. But it absolutely flies in the face of what Jesus said explicitly. Why would Jesus warn about forfeiting your soul if it's impossible? Or even better, why did Jesus die on the cross if everyone's going to go to heaven? Does that make any sense to anybody here? It doesn't to me. Jesus, verse 27. Now he is turning prophet predictor. He's looking deep into the future, after his death, after his resurrection, after his ascension. For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory. We call it the second coming of Jesus. With his angels. And he will reward each person according to what they have done. How well they denied themselves and carried the cross. And then verse 28 is one of the enigmatic verses in the Bible. It's kind of akin to last Sunday's, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth will be loose in heaven. And we can speculate, but we really don't know what Jesus meant by that, I don't think. And in this statement too, truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. What does that mean? There are all kinds of possibilities. We really don't know. It's a safe guess that Matthew thought at least partly meant when Peter and James and John were with Jesus on the mountain where Jesus was transfigured. He became dazzlingly white. And Moses and Elijah appeared. Remember that story? It's called the Transfiguration. It's the passage that immediately follows this passage. So I'm thinking Matthew put those two together, at least in his mind. Now, as I like to do, I like to try to put the sermon in a sentence. And you will notice with this sentence that Donna played a part. Yeah, she didn't know she was playing a part, but she did. Thank you. The cross of Christ is both a beauty that compels us and a choice that commands us. Do you think that's true? I think it's true, absolutely. The cross of Christ is both a beauty that compels us and a choice that commands us. How many of you have crosses on today? Did any of you have crosses on? I wore my cross today that I received on the walk to Emmaus. Oh man, it's been what, 15 years ago or so. This is a cross that Brenda bought the other day. Hobby Lobby, is this what you got? Beautiful cross that we're going to hang somewhere in our house. In fact, she asked me to hang it. I didn't get to it. I wanted to bring it today. Allie, you have a cross on, don't you? I saw that before worship today. Why do we wear crosses? Why do we have crosses like this in Rome? Why do we have beautiful oak crosses like the one before you? Why do we do that, do you think? Because there's something about the cross, about the beauty of the cross, and what it stands for. Don't you think? The cross of Christ is a beauty that compels us. John 3:16 is almost everybody's favorite verse. And it's because it talks about the beauty of the cross. For God so loved the world. Come on, say it with me. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. The cross speaks of the being of God, not just a far-off God of the deists, who's not involved, but the God of Jesus. God who loves us so much that he gave his most precious companion, Son, Jesus, to live and die for us. John 3:16 is love for his beauty, the beauty of those words that compels us. Later in the Gospel of John, he wrote these words, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." Can you hear that? Does that resonate with you? Have you been watching the news lately about Hurricane Harvey? And can you see in that tragedy the same kind of juxtaposition that we have with the cross, the beauty compelling, the choice commanding? Can you see that with Hurricane Harvey? Because on the one hand, It's a harsh reality about the power of nature, right? 50 inches of rain in a city that floods with 1 inch of rain. The ground is mainly clay, and there's all kind of concrete, and it's flat. They cannot handle water. How many people have died in Hurricane Harvey? How many? 40, 50? Something like that. How many people have been dispossessed of their homes? Thousands, right? It's a harsh reality. But I was just watching on the news this morning about different men and women that are down there in boats. Then there's a picture of a man carrying a woman. The woman is carrying a child. Have you seen that? Have you seen scenes like that? There's in the midst of the tragedy of Hurricane Harvey, there is a beauty that compels us. There was an advertisement on news this morning. It pictured the Lone Star State, Texas, and then it had a caption something like, "We are with you." And that's true, isn't it? That there is something about a tragedy that brings a solidarity. There's a beauty in the midst of the tragic. Isn't that true with the cross, isn't it? The cross of Christ is both a beauty that compels us. And the call to worship that Debbie read for us. I love it when Debbie reads. Debbie reads the Bible. She loves the Bible. She believes the Bible. She reads the Bible like she knows it. Even though you had that hard word, reconciliation, a bunch of times, right?
Right.
Yeah, we don't say that much in Davis County, do we? But right at the end of that passage that she read, Paul, talking about Jesus, God made him who knew no sin to be sin so that we might become the righteousness of God. The cross of Christ, friends, is a beauty that compels us. And, not but. Old Testament professor used to say all the time, boys, it's not but, it's and. It's a beauty that compels us and a choice that commands us. The challenge of the cross is not just something we wear and wax poetic over, though there's nothing wrong with that. And thank God for Isaac Watts and the other who put together When I Survey the Wondrous Cross. Poetry, music. The cross is a metaphor of self-denial, Jesus said. If you want to be my disciple, you have to deny yourself. Say no to self because we are sinners by nature, right? The cross is a metaphor of the 3 S's of Christianity: service, sacrifice, and suffering. The challenge of the cross. The cross implies a paradox, losing our lives in order to find it. The cross shouts an eternal warning: don't forfeit your soul. And the cross points to future rewards in God's kingdom based on how well we have carried our cross. The cross of Christ is both a beauty that compels us and a choice that commands us. Let us pray. Lord, to ponder the cross in all its dimensions, in all of its sacred implications, is beyond me, beyond us. But I pray again that the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts might be acceptable unto you, O